Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli back with another review video, and yes, you read the title, and as was teased in the last review video, well, like I said, because even in the last review video, there were a lot of big films that came out during the 1970s decade, and from one year after the next and up until 1979, one of these films that came out in 1979, and this being the first ever film on a certain science fiction franchise that, it kind of brought this franchise back, but not even properly until the next installment. That's what really got the franchise back up on its feet. But you know what? Without this, we wouldn't have what would come next, even if this did not really got the franchise back up on its feet still. Yeah. And yep, that's right, guys. And joining me, of course, is my dad, aka Little Blue. And of course, it's very fitting that he joins me for this, and since both me and him, we are Trekkies, that's right, guys, from 1979, Star Trek, the motion picture. Yeah, so, Star Trek, the motion picture. And wouldn't you think so that, you know, even though Star Trek, the motion picture really didn't get the franchise back up on its feet, without it, we still wouldn't have what would come next, even Wrath of Khan.
That's true, and in fact, initially, NBC was going to bring Star Trek back on a new network they were going to launch called, I believe it was called NBC2.
Yeah, even Shatner best explained this on the Star Trek Summit, so...
And they, the new Star Trek was going to be their flagship.
Phase 2.
Star Trek Phase 2.
And Shatner was in line to come back, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
Leonard Nimoy was not.
Yeah, he was not, because at that time he was distancing himself from Star Trek and the character Spock at that time.
Right. So the commander you see, the actor who plays the commander on Space Station Epsilon 9, he was actually cast originally to play
as a Vulcan.
As a Vulcan, the new first officer on the Star Trek Phase 2.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And I've actually seen some screenshots of him when they were doing screen tests with him, and it looked as though everything was going to stay pretty true to the original series as far as uniforms and everything else.
Yeah.
But the problem was when they were in the middle of this project, starting this project.
And even when they were going back and forth that, you know, we're going to bring the... No, we're starting. And this was according to Shatner and Leonard, so...
So the next thing that happened was this new movie called Star Wars.
In 1977.
And basically, it was this jaw-dropping, epic sci-fi, adventure.
It brought back science fiction in a brand new way, basically, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was grittier.
Well, and keep in mind, because Star Wars, it's not just science fiction, it's also fantasy, space fantasy, to be more precise.
So when Star Wars came out, the heads of NBC just kind of scratched their heads and said,
and Paramount,
we're going to have to rethink this. And that's when they settled on this big project, Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
And besides how the original series looked, even to this day, there's just something about it and the charm that it holds. With how it looked.
I was very happy that they did a lot of. They did a lot of CGI work on it, and
like when the director's cut happened,
redid some things. No, on the original series when they went back and
I know what you're talking about.
They freshened it up, and the special effects now are just amazing.
My only gripe is that no hard feelings on the CG and how the Enterprise and anything else looks. They should have at least kept some shots of the models, because some of the shots of the models. Even if you watch the original version of the original series, some shots of the models still look pretty good.
Well, yeah, that's true. But if you look at the opening sequence, and you'll see a lot of it even in the opening sequence when the show is coming on, the original series, you'll see a shot of the Enterprise where it's going around the planet. And that shot was done by attaching the model of the Enterprise to a train set.
Yeah.
And had it in an orbital, where it would...
And how it's circling the planet.
Exactly. So when you compare that to what they can do now with computers and everything, I mean, it's just jaw-dropping when you look at certain shots and I was watching an episode the other day. It was Tomorrow Is Yesterday.
Yes, I was going to talk about Tomorrow's Yesterday because there are numerous of shots that, even in the remaster version, look a heck of a lot better.
And when they do the slingshot around the sun, it's amazing.
And the original was just like moving like this in space.
Yeah,
like,
they didn't have the technology.
They even got the shots of the Enterprise in orbit of Earth. They got that right because Earth looking big. So
yeah, and even
because
when they were in the atmosphere, Earth's atmosphere, in the upper atmosphere, they were, it was much more realistic.
Yeah,
much more realistic.
It was.
I thought.
But coming back to, okay, so there's a good example and such, but coming back to the motion picture, because, here, like, to ask you this, like, what were your memories and recollections that, obviously, you must remember that, that Paramount was going to be doing the first ever Star Trek movie. Do you have any memories of that?
Yeah, there was, I have a vague recollection, but I do remember I was really excited when I found out that Star Trek was going to be made into a motion picture. And, after having seen Star Wars, I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing. And then they start, there were photos that came out, that were actually, back then it was in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And
this is before online and articles and such. Yeah.
The posters. And the first thing I noticed was the nacelles, how they had changed.
Yep. And on the shirt that I have on, just.
Exactly. Yeah. That particular Enterprise was.
The Enterprise refit.
It was completely redone. And it looked really cool. It looked, to a kid my age, in 7th grade, I was 12 years old.
Of course.
It was really cool.
Mm-hmm. And, and also, let's also keep in mind that without Star Wars, we wouldn't have Star Trek still. Star Wars is what saved Star Trek.
I think so.
Yeah.
I really do. But then again, Star Trek, the original series, helped to inspire Star Wars.
Yes, but also here's another thing. Star Trek did grow a fan base even after its canceling.
Yes.
And even aside from there being an animated series, as we all know, after its cancellation, Star Trek grew a fan base. It also started these conventions and such.
Correct.
And this was, of course, until we would get a movie of Star Trek.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you did get to see this when it came out in theaters, right?
Star Trek the Motion Picture, yes.
Yeah.
I saw it in downtown Charleston back when there were actual, theaters, not multiplexes like there are now, but this was a theater, a movie theater, and I think I saw it at the Capitol Theater on Summer Street. I think that's where it was playing. And I remember my dad, your Papa Blue, he took sort of my namesake, Little Blue. My dad's nickname was Blue, so my dad drove me and my cousin to the movies to see it, and we were just awestruck. The opening sequence.
Well, before we get into the movie, because looking the first things we have to say, because even looking back on it, because how do you still feel about the motion picture? Looking back on it, and even from the original and the director's cut, still, do you think it's still a pretty good Star Trek film and such, or what?
I think it stands on its own as a really it's a solid piece of work. It's a great movie. The whole concept behind V'ger was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Even as a kid, I was blown away. But when you find out the big reveal, Voyager 6.
But until we get more on that later.
But it was, special effects wise, it was beyond anything I could imagine with Star Trek.
Yeah.
It was exactly what I had seen with Star Wars. So you're used to that. But when you see those same special effects applied to the Star Trek universe, it's just a different thing altogether.
It is. And as for me, well, I don't know, because all I remember is that, at that time when some of the Star Trek, some of the Star Trek films were being re-released in the early 2000s, and we had had DVDs of those. I remember the first time watching Star Trek the Motion Picture, the director's cut. I had not seen the theatrical cut, I don't think until, say, maybe when we got the Blu-ray copy of it, but, and I don't know, because I say both versions of the motion picture are fine. Which do you prefer?
I like both. I will tell you that there is, I think on the director's cut, that the trek through V'ger, when they enter V'ger and they're flying through it, it's much longer. And I think, at that time, those special effects were cutting edge. It was cutting edge CGI. Nobody had ever seen anything like it before, but the problem was they kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And I will say this, when I was at that age, about 12 years old in the movie theater watching it. It got a little boring. It really did. After a while, I was just like sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, how big is this ship?"
Well,
You
at
know,
least
how, you know.
at least the music kept us, company and such.
Well-
The late legendary Jerry Goldsmith and his wonderful score music in Star Trek.
They would cut back to the crew, and you would see reactions on their faces.
Yeah.
That helped to break up the monotony.
And they had a few bits of dialogue,
but there was
patterns
also,
unrecognizable and such.
I think there was just a little bit of overindulgence there, because once they saw what they could do with the special effects and computer-generated imaging, they were just like, "Oh man, this looks great!" And they just put this whole thing in the film, and it was just like, it was just, okay, yeah, enough is enough. I mean, yeah, it's fantastic, but
Yeah.
you can only. It's like once you see the Grand Canyon for the first time, it's like, wow, and then after about 10 minutes, like, yeah, it's Grand Canyon. I mean, after a while, it kind of wears on you a little bit. Once it's the initial shock. So that's why you just kind of whet their appetite. You just keep them wanting more.
Even Leonard Nimoy made a comment on that, because
yeah.
according to like how, remembering people's reaction, like, there's the starship, and where's the story? So there was a story.
There was a strong story with that whole movie.
Yeah, but to stop you right there, to finish what I have to say, overall, for me, Star Trek the Motion Picture, well, like what you said, it stands on its own and such, and, it's not that bad. Is it one of the best Star Trek films, like the greatest? Not even close, but that's not to say it's bad, right? It's not a bad Star Trek film.
It's not bad at all, and in fact, if you look with the shots of San Francisco with the Golden Gate Bridge and the ships flying and everything.
Yep.
They've used some of those images even in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
They have, yep.
And
reusing the Star Trek theme that started in the motion picture.
I will tell you something I do recall specifically, because it had just opened. We didn't go to the first showing. We went to probably the third showing.
To stop you there once again, let's go ahead and read the description / the story as always. You can take it from here.
The Federation calls on Admiral James T. Kirk and the crew of the Starship Enterprise to contain an immense Nimbus object that's on a crash course with Earth. After investigating, the crew discovers that the alien cloud harbors artificial intelligence with an ominous primary directive. Crisis strikes when a probe dispatched by the energy cloud attacks the crew, abducting navigator Lieutenant Ilea, played by Persis Khambaty.
The late Persis Khambaty.
Yes, an android look-alike containing her memories shows up soon after.
Right. So, with that out of the way, because getting back into the film itself and what you were going to be saying?
I do recall, I have a very vivid memory of this, when we were sitting in the movie theater and, we had seen the opening sequence of, and I can talk about that all day long with the Klingon D7 battlecruisers.
Oh yeah, you really get a kick out of even still to this day, like, just love the opening with the 3 Klingon ships.
I can tell you this much right now, that
which, by the way, one of the Klingons, the Klingon captain being played by the late Mark Leonard, who was Sarek,
right,
Spock's father,
and who invented the beginnings of the Klingon language? None other than James Doohan.
Was he the only one, or surely, because there was
some... Oh no, there were others. But
James was one of them.
James Doohan was the first to create a language, a Klingon language,
aka Scotty.
Yeah, and it's
who'd have thought that Scotty invented the Klingon language? Was one of the people that invented it.
Yeah. And he did a lot of the character voices on the animated series too.
Yeah, not just him, but even Nichelle Nichols was another one, and even I think Majel Barrett too. Yeah, Majel Barrett as well. They did the 3 of them did a handful of voices for the alien characters. Right. Even most notably, James Doohan was the voice of Erix. If anybody remembers Erix,
Yeah. Erix was a cool, and I think there was a nod to Erix on the Star Trek movie that came out in 2009, 2010.
The first of the Kelvin timeline.
Right, with the J.J. Abrams directed, because that creature looked very much like...
Even the animated series Lower Decks, they brought that alien species back of Erix, so I recall. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a cool-looking species, too.
It is.
But back to my original point, when I was in the movie theater with my cousin, we're sitting there, and the theater was packed, because we saw it on opening weekend, and I think we were seeing like the 3rd screening of the movie, and we were sitting there, and once the initial sequence finishes with the Klingon battle D7 or D9 battle cruisers,
Yeah.
and then the then Epsilon 9 station, then they show the shuttlecraft landing at Starfleet headquarters. And as soon as that camera pans up and you see Kirk, you see Shatner's face in the glass.
And that epic music that Jerry Goldsmith conducts, and what a way to, for that to be Kirk's entrance and with that music.
Well, when
Dun dun dun.
when you
dun.
first see Kirk through the window of that
Again,
shuttle,
accompanied by Jerry Goldsmith's music.
total applause, eruption of applause in the theater where we were.
I can imagine.
People were applauding and cheering and loved
That
it because there was finally Kirk coming back.
He's back after
back.
such a long time.
Exactly. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, even before Kirk made his appearance, Spock technically came in first. Do you have any recollection on Spock's when he first appeared? Because,
I think there was some applause there too.
Yeah, because Spock being on Vulcan, and of course Spock once again being played by Leonard Nimoy, because this thing that Spock is going to be doing...
Kolinar ritual.
Yeah.
To purge all emotions. And he could not complete the training because...
No, he stops it because
he has emotions. He is distracted by this calling from this V'ger.
Yes, he senses V'ger's presence and that it's a deadly threat.
And he is totally distracted, so he can't concentrate. So he realizes he cannot accept the distinction of completing the Kolinar ritual. So and to his credit, and he's honest about it. He doesn't he passes.
Exactly. And even Kirk, because he found out about V'ger's approach to Earth. So,
right.
And yeah, because is there anything else to say, like on the opening of the Klingon cruisers and with Space Station Epsilon 9 and?
I will tell you that the Klingon battle cruisers.
Did I get that right? Epsilon 9.
Epsilon 9. When you see that opening sequence with those, I remember seeing that for the first time, and I just thought, oh wow, this is how it's supposed to look. Because when George Lucas did Star Wars, those ships, they were not perfect. They had reentry burns on them. They had pockmarks on them where they had
oil
taken,
stains and stuff
like
that.
It was not perfect. Everything in Star Trek, the original series, was just too spit and polish.
Exactly.
It was just too perfect. Even when J.J. Abrams did the reboot in the Kelvin timeline, that you could see the wear and tear on certain things, which was much more realistic. I can't say enough. But when you see those Klingon battle cruisers and you see the detail on those, it blew me away.
Well,
even to this day, when I'm watching it, I'm admiring the detail they put into those ships.
Yeah, I think for the Klingons it's acceptable because they're warriors, and surely they don't keep things, looking spotless and such. So
yeah, exactly.
But I think for Starfleet in this case, even back then, it seemed to work. They're always having their ships and such be spotless and clean, just,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I even recall Adam Savage of Mythbusters definitely explaining this in the full detail, the difference on, say, Star Wars and Star Trek and with the ships, for example. So,
oh, yeah.
Anyways, but, so the Klingons, they're firing on whatever this is, but, doesn't work and it hits back on them. And how, well, very soon it's going to approach Epsilon 9, and very soon, in like 3 days, Earth. Mm-hmm. And, well, from Spock and Kirk, they're well aware of this cloud's presence, and even Kirk, planning to, take control, commanding the Enterprise, even though that, it's not fully fit yet, but it's, now it's got to be fit in 12 hours. Mm-hmm. And the Enterprise is the only ship in range where it can intercept this mysterious cloud.
And, as McCoy points out later, that he used that crisis to ram his command down Starfleet's throat.
Even poor Decker
to get back the Enterprise, and he did it. But he also knew that he was the most experienced commander who had logged the most star hours,
and 5 years out, and especially 5 years out in space,
to do what he did, and to to be able to go back out there again, he didn't have a knee-jerk reaction, and you saw that difference. You saw that it was right for Kirk to be in the command seat because Decker would overreact. He would have knee-jerk reactions
he
to
did,
things,
yeah.
and Kirk would say, "No, let's." His demeanor was, "Let's just wait," and everything worked out, and it was, and he.
And I don't think Decker would have been really prepared for something like this.
No, he wouldn't.
No,
he wouldn't.
But
He was
Kirk
not an
would.
experienced commander like Kirk was.
Yeah. Sure, Kirk helped get him there and such, and, well, even captaining the Enterprise, but still, when this happened, not good. Not a good timing. No, not fit for him, so. But at least, Kirk, he had Decker, and Decker being played by Stephen Collins, and I know I've told you this, in case you had forgotten, Decker is the son of Commodore Decker from Doomsday Machine.
Okay.
I know I told you this before. Did you forget?
I did forget.
Yeah, so if for those of you that did or did not know, and if any of you remember from season 2 of the original series, the episode Doomsday Machine, Commodore Decker is the father of Decker in the motion picture.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
That is really cool.
So
I do want to talk about
yes.
one of the greatest scenes for Star Trek for a Star Trek comeback like that was when
well, Kirk
is on the bridge and he's told, all personnel are aboard, but we have one that's refusing to get in the transporter, and he knew who it was. He knew who it was.
He knew,
and
because we know whom would be too stubborn sometimes.
Yeah, and when he comes aboard, he's the first thing he says is, "Just a moment, Captain, sir. I'll explain what happened. Your revered Admiral Nagura invoked a little seldom used activation clause. In other words, Captain, they drafted me." They didn't. This was your idea. I love that line. I love that whole scene. And
even the getup he has on, even the beard.
Oh, it's awesome.
Tell me that does not remind you of, I don't know, like even the nostalgia critic did this joke, like Saturday Night Fever or something.
Yeah.
He
had the chains on. It looked like he stepped out of a disco. Really.
And speaking of which, we'll get to that in a moment. But what you were going to say?
Well, he's and he's going on, and he finally, and Kirk is like, "I need you, Bones," and he,
Yep. Damn it, Bones, I need you.
And he holds his hand out like
permission to come aboard, and the computer voice, permission granted.
He says, "Well, Jim, I hear Chapel's an MD now. Well,
yeah,
I'm going to need a nurse, not another doctor that'll argue every little diagnosis with me. And they probably changed the whole sick bay, too. I know engineers, they love to change things." I love that line.
Bones was not wrong, because surely they did.
And he comes back on the bridge after
the whole Enterprise going through a refit.
And Kirk says, "Well, Bones, does the new sick bay meet with your approval?" He says, "It does not. It's like working at a damn computer center." I absolutely love those lines. That he was always, to me, comic relief in Star Trek.
Of course,
the banter
he was.
between him and Spock, and
or even say sometimes him and his chemistry with Jim. So even if it's all three of them. And speaking of Nurse Chapel, because it was great to see Nurse Chapel come back, now DM and such.
Yeah, it was.
As she's made it to big time.
She's an MD now. She's
MD, thank you.
A medical doctor, MD.
I got it backwards. And also Yeoman making another returning as well. Yeoman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, this was her first time. This was her first appearance since, season 1 of the original series in Balance of Terror. That was her last appearance until the motion picture.
You're talking about Grace Lee Whitney, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Well, Janice, she is now I think she was.
Well, that's her actual name, Janice.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Janice Rand. She was Yeoman Rand in the original series,
exactly.
And I think now she's probably she's no doubt an officer, and Yeoman does eventually go to.
Exactly.
But
did you happen to also know that? Because the late Grace Lee, one of her sons makes an appearance in the motion picture.
Oh, okay.
He's the Vulcan that interacts with Kirk.
Oh, that's her son.
Yes, it is, and who unfortunately met his demise in a transporter malfunction.
Yeah, which is really that's a pretty graphic scene. I mean, it's not,
especially when Janice notices that it gets worse, that they're forming.
Yeah, she's just, they're, oh my God, they're forming.
Yeah, and that's not a good. That's clearly not a good sign, judging by her reaction.
And then Kirk says, "Starfleet, do you have them?"
I love that. I love that, and with
Enterprise.
the response,
And it's just like, it's this pause, Enterprise, this is Starfleet.
no, they didn't say this is Starfleet. It was just Enterprise. What we got back didn't live long.
Didn't live long.
Fortunately.
And you can't imagine what it must look like. I mean, it's just a mess.
It
Probably
is.
just a gob mess of, flesh and bones. Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about how the transporter system theoretically works. That it's sort of like beaming a television picture. You have a picture and then it's electronically transmitted to and then reassembled on your TV screen. Well, the transporter system works similarly, except you're working with matter instead of energy. You're transformed from matter to energy and then back to matter again.
Yeah.
And there's been rumors that the military, the government has experimented with it and have experimented with teleportation and that they can do it. But, who knows for sure.
Yeah. Also, I meant to bring this up because when we're talking about Bones and the getup he has on, let's talk about the wardrobe in the motion picture. The Starfleet uniforms. I mean, for me personally, I don't hate them. I'm just saying, and especially obviously for Starfleet, the evolution of the uniforms and once in a decade or something, I don't know, they would have the Starfleet uniforms would change, and okay, but I'm just saying, I guess that in the mode for me, I guess in the motion picture they work fine, and let's face it, because this was in 1979, so
So they were working on this around 77, they were working on fashions
77, 78.
Right.
Yeah.
I can imagine that their wardrobe design, when they're going through the designs, the uniform designs, they're thinking, because I remember that era. And the big thing was the big belt buckles. Okay, yeah. So they look at that and said, "Hey, big belt buckles are in. Let's give them a big belt buckle on the front."
The Starfleet logo which I guess seemed fine, as long as of course it would be acceptable because it'd be the logo of Starfleet. So
I think what got me was their socklet feet. I mean, it was like their boots. They didn't have boots on. It was like their pants went all the way around their boots, and it's like, how the heck do you change clothes? You can't if your shoes come untied. If your boots. Even
one moment. At a certain point in the film where Kirk has a bit of a Captain Wardrobe change, short sleeve.
Yeah, now that was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool look, but
overall, the uniforms and how they look, just I don't know.
Well, the uniforms, and I think when they did,
even the crew said, the cast and crew said that they were uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And also, it was best said in the Star Trek Summit when they talked about the wardrobe, because when Whoopi Goldberg started talking to them about the wardrobe, Jonathan Frakes and Patrick Stewart, because the uniforms that they wore in the first 2 seasons, uncomfortable. And even Jonathan asked Shatner, "Did you hate your spacesuit?" and said, "I hated it after lunch."
Yeah.
And even Leonard and Shatner said that for the motion picture, for every shot, they had to be steamed.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted to keep those uniforms looking nice, not wrinkled. Well, and the same goes for when it came to the Next Generation. They wanted, Patrick said, that, even from Gene Roddenberry's request, wrinkle-free and so on.
Well, they would also, because I remember seeing a behind-the-scenes look on the Next Generation when they're, and I think it was Jonathan Frakes, they were using one of those lint rollers, like people that have dogs and cats that get the dog hair and cat hair off of them. And you've seen them, you know what I'm talking about. It looks
of course.
Like a big wad of
haven't we all not used them?
Sure. And so they were using one of those on his uniform, between takes to make sure it was lint-free.
Right.
And, I get that. But I also noticed Jonathan Frakes, obviously his uniform in the next season when they changed uniforms and they were 2-piece uniforms.
And then it got a bit better, a little later in season 3.
Every time he would stand up, he would always adjust. You notice he'd always adjust that tunic that he had on.
Yeah.
Every single time. And I think it was almost just natural for him to do that. This uniform. And I think they kept that in the scripts. I think they said, go ahead and do that because that's just your thing.
it seems natural. It seems to work.
It does. It does seem to work.
'Cause
Although he's the only one that ever does it that I ever saw. So
maybe for the character of Riker, he must have times have a bit of a struggle with his uniform.
yeah, well, he's kind of a big guy, so it's
He
not like
is.
it's
Oh, yeah.
that it's he's got a lot of loose material there. I mean, it's a form fitting
Yeah.
uniform. So
But again, overall on the uniforms in the motion pictures, still, because
they were a little too sterile looking for me. I liked them okay.
I did too.
But they were too much to me of a drastic change from what the original series was, and I think that was really it. By the time they got to Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan,
Yeah.
they figured it out, and they came out with a Starfleet uniform that was just I mean, it kicked butt. I mean, it was awesome. Loved it. So, but this one, no, it looked uncomfortable, and no doubt it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at least some of the other wardrobes in the motion picture, like from the Vulcans, Klingons, or any alien in the background, it looked pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So
They did.
also, how did you first feel on very quickly? How did you feel on the Klingons and their close look? Because it wasn't quite there yet. Their official look. Because
They were pretty close to what they've remained pretty true to that motion picture. How they portrayed them in the motion picture.
Yeah.
And you got to figure that that different Klingons are going to have different appearances. Not everybody looks alike. Not every human looks alike. So every Klingon is going to have a different appearance.
Yeah.
A slightly different appearance. Darker skin, lighter skin, blah, blah, blah. Hairstyle a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Higher, hairline, lower hairline, all that stuff. So different noses, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I think the way they had it, it was pretty much... Now, they did look, and I remember Mark Leonard, it looked like he had... it almost looked like he had, Tyrannosaurus Rex teeth or something.
I was going to
pointed.
say, obviously he had prosthetic teeth, so I don't think you'd really recognize that it's Mark Leonard.
No, but I think the language too is what made him scary. I mean, yeah.
Tush, tush. Yeah, of course.
That kind of stuff. So they looked like you would not want to mess with the Klingon. Now the ones from the original series, they didn't.
Well,
that was then. This is
that
now.
wasn't until, say, I guess Deep Space Nine, but especially Enterprise, when they would technically explain that, well, the Klingons suffered for a long time a disease or something that made them look like human.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it was up to, say, the motion picture when they started to turn back into their old selves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and from there on.
Good way to explain it, I guess. That's really the only way they can explain it.
Of course. Even Worf, all he had to say, because if you remember in the one episode of Deep Space Nine where they travel back into the episode of the Tribbles.
Exactly.
Worf, because O'Brien, Bashir, and Odo, because when they realized that, those are Klingons in the bar and such, because Mr. Worf, and all Worf can say is, they are Klingons. And it is a long story.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. And, but also, the shots that kind of go on. So, obviously one of the biggies would have to be the one where Kirk and Scotty, they make their way to the Enterprise.
Yeah, and those were...
I feel that is okay. Because you really get to see the full detail of the Enterprise, and accompanied by Jerry Goldsmith's fantastic score and music, I think it's fine.
Well,
especially since this is the first time Kirk has seen the Enterprise in a long time, and because of its refit.
This is the first reveal on screen of the new refitted Enterprise,
and in all of its glory.
And it is, all of its glory, and it's really a flyby money shot. The way they did it, and it is a money shot because it's fantastic. Because you're dealing with, when you're looking at that, when you watch the movie, you can appreciate the fact you're looking at a model. You're looking at a model. Almost pretty much the size of a bed.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
And it's a probably close to the size of a full size bed is how big this model was, and so you're seeing a solid object. You're not seeing something that's being recreated on screen.
No.
It's there's special effects and everything added in, green screen effect, all that, where they put the stuff in the background, but the ship itself it's lit up. It's a solid three-dimensional object. It's not just CGI.
Exactly.
So I think that was I think that shot, that extended footage where they're flying around, that was warranted, most definitely.
Yes, it was.
Because it gives you an idea of the size of that ship.
And compared to how big it is compared to, say, human size, you know,
Exactly.
in the world of Star Trek.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also, yeah, again, Kirk, you know, telling everybody, and also, reuniting with Chekhov, once again being played by Walter Kane.
Walter Koenig.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Nichelle Nichols, Uhura, George Takei, Sulu, and and a little later we of course see Nurse Chapel once again being played by Jean's wife, the late Majel Barrett, and of course Janice. But also, yeah, again, when he meets with Decker, he's unaware of this. And you can imagine how difficult it'd be, you know, for Kirk when breaking the news to Decker on this, you know.
Yeah, and Scotty's in earshot, and he hears the whole thing, and he sees how he reacts.
Yeah, and
he's
feeling
just really,
feeling awful about this
he's-
towards Decker.
you know, he feels sorry for him, but he's also glad that Kirk's aboard.
I'm sure Kirk felt sorry too, because again, Kirk was responsible for getting Decker where he was on the Enterprise.
Well, and you see when Kirk comes on.
I mean, he did apologize to Decker,
right,
so.
but when Kirk comes on the bridge for the first time, you know, and he talks to everyone, and everybody's glad to see him aboard. You know, the whole bridge crew. When he leaves, you know, there's an ensign who's kind of.
I know.
He's kind of negative, kind of rebellious about it. And I think this is in the director's cut.
It
where he
is,
says-
yeah.
he makes
Because I
mention, he
actually,
says, you know,
I did a watch on the director's cut, you know, before we did our recording of this. But anyways,
the ensign made a comment that basically Decker knew the ship backwards and forwards, and he had, you know, practically written the book on the ship.
Uhura is the one that sets him straight on this.
Yeah, she said that their chances of survival increased with Kirk there because
Yes.
she knew. You know,
She knew!
They all knew what he was capable of.
Especially because you know what, they were there for that 5-year journey.
you know. Sure,
Yeah.
and they all came back alive.
Exactly. But despite the fact we lost 2 big, you know, characters in this, but until we get there. Also, yeah, because the whole departure, like, what's say on that? I mean, I don't think that went by that slow.
No, I don't think it went by that slow. You know, they depart, but you get a better view. You get a better sense of, you know, what they do, clear all moorings, you know, all that stuff when they're departing. You know, aft thrusters and you know 1/4 impulse power and all that stuff, and how and Kirk will say, you know, departure angle.
Yeah.
And you see the Earth, and it's just getting smaller and smaller.
Oh yeah.
And it gives you an idea of the speed, even at impulse power.
Even 2 things I wanted to mention, because did you notice this one guy in the spacesuit, you know, outside of space, and when the Enterprise was departing, he was like kind of like spinning, and then he kind of waved at the Enterprise.
Yep.
And there's a random shot we cut to where a door is closing on engineering, and this one guy just, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh well, it's there in the movie. I don't know why, but it's there. But also, Ilia. What's say on Ilia?
Ilia was an interesting character.
And there had been a relationship between her and Decker.
She was Deltan, as they said. I guess from planet Delta, whatever. But she was
yeah.
Deltan, and so there was something about Deltans that they knew about because Chekhov smiled when they said she was Deltan, and I don't know if it was because they knew that she didn't have any hair, but you know, I thought, man, you know, if she looks that good without hair, I can imagine what she looks like with hair, you know.
She still looked beautiful. You know,
yeah,
being
she was
bald.
beautiful.
Yeah, because you know, poor what's her name again? Paris. What's her name again? Ali.
Persis Kambati.
Yeah,
sorry.
you know, poor her, because you know the fact that she knew what she was doing, and you know, because I've seen the behind the scenes footage where her hair being shaved.
Yeah.
So yeah, but look what the performance it turned out for her in the motion picture. And again, like I also said, a relationship between her and Decker. Like, what's say on that?
Obviously, they had a history when they first reunite,
Yeah.
and it's you know that builds the tension builds throughout the movie.
Yes, it does.
To the point that when she is obviously taken from the ship by V'ger,
it's unfortunate.
You know, she's replaced with an android.
But a part of Alia does at times like pop out of the android.
Exactly,
like, yeah.
because V'ger had created her to be exactly like the original Alia. So even some of her characteristics or memories and things were remained intact.
Yeah.
Even though she was a machine.
Exactly. And also, like, the one line that she says, like, you know, my oath of seppuku is on record, Captain. Like,
Yeah.
Let's say on that, 'cause I don't know. I mean,
You know, she
seems kind of random to say.
well, oath of
from what I know.
celibacy, meaning that she is basically she's married to the ship and not to anybody else. She's not there to mess around with the crew.
Oh.
She's there to
and not and especially like the
do her duty.
and and not let the relationship between her and Decker, interfere and such.
I
At
picked up on
least,
that too. Yeah, that there was that they may have known about their history. So
Of course.
and she's devoted to her duties, and she asked to take her duty station. So
Yeah.
she means business. She's very
Of
serious.
course. And also, another, because despite, some slow moments, but still, some exciting action-packed moments, like the wormhole sequence.
The wormhole sequence was interesting.
Yes.
And there was an asteroid that pulled them into the wormhole, but it was also they called it the wormhole effect that was created when they went to warp because the warp engines were not in balance.
Yeah.
And of course, in comes this courier that Chekhov says, I imagine it's a courier, and it looks very much, it has almost like a Romulan look to it, but it's a Vulcan ship. It's a Vulcan shuttle.
yeah.
That is a deep space shuttle,
but also-
long-range deep space shuttle.
Yeah, but also more on the wormhole because, Kirk ordered, Mr. Chekhov stand by on phasers, but Decker, no, belay that phaser order, arm photon torpedoes.
And that's when you get into the whole thing that there's a struggle there at first. And it kind of goes through, there's some tension there between Kirk and Decker throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, there are
kind
times,
of a tug of war
but-
at times, but Decker acted appropriately because they could not have used phasers because when the engines went in balance,
And
the
little did-
phasers went offline.
Little did Kirk know.
Kirk
'cause-
didn't know.
Yeah.
So
I don't blame him because how was he supposed to know?
and that's when he tells Decker, he said,
Nobody gave Kirk details on say with the phasers and torpedoes.
he says, you saved the ship, and he says, I'm aware of that, sir, Captain. And he says, stop competing with me, Decker. And but he also
Stop
says to
competing
him,
with me, Decker.
he says, and then Decker asks to speak freely, and he says,
Permission granted.
He says, your lack of, you haven't logged a single star hour in, however long.
I think even Bones, is kind of on Decker's side with this too.
He is, and
Because
that,
knowing Bones, he knows at times the personality and such with Jim.
Decker kind of brings Kirk out of his, puffed up chest, because he's captain of the Enterprise. He's been captain of the Enterprise. He knows exactly what to do. Well, it is an almost all new ship.
It is. Yeah.
So there's going to be things, there's going to be operations he's just not going to know
And
about.
Kirk hadn't seen nor stepped foot on the Enterprise for a long time. So
You see Kirk's realization, and he eats a slice of humble pie, so to speak, and he says, and I remember, and when he says to Decker, he says, I trust that you'll nursemaid me through these difficulties, mister. And
Yeah.
he says, I will. So that was kind of Kirk bowing to Decker's expertise and knowledge of the Enterprise.
exactly.
And
And things did later on get patched up between them.
oh yeah, they did.
And also, Spock's entrance and boarding the Enterprise.
There was that was a kind of a, even still, it's a very uncomfortable feeling when I'm watching that. I'm really uncomfortable because
What is?
when Spock steps on the bridge, and then here comes Doctors Chapel and McCoy onto the bridge, and why so help me, I'm actually pleased to see you.
It's good to see you.
And he looks at McCoy
And Chapel.
and he just no expression whatsoever, no expressionless, and just looks at him and just regards him and just looks at him, and you just see the smile leave their face, and they're just like,
And then it goes away.
and you hear Uhura say, "It's how we all feel, Mr. Spock," and he still doesn't
there we
acknowledge
go,
anything
yeah.
because he is still struggling. He's just come out of this, this big long, however long it took, this big long ceremony where he's trying to purge himself of all emotion. So he is still kind of in that mode, trying to work himself back into human interaction. Because he is half human, at least.
I never once, even when rewatching it, I never once got that feeling that it was awkward or something.
It was very awkward for me.
But I think, and like you said, with what Uhura says, I think it kind of helps.
Yeah, it kind of breaks the tension a little bit, but it's still, and then they go into Kirk's quarters, and Spock, And McCoy
Well,
says,
because at least everybody, like, they would, of course, know that Spock knows, what is going to happen when this cloud, yeah, because,
and
so.
Spock's, and remember McCoy says to Spock, he says, Spock, you haven't changed a bit. You're still just as warm, and
Of course.
And McCoy or Spock basically insults him. Basically insults him back. He says, "Nor do you, Doctor, for your whatever that line he says. I can't remember exactly how it is, but it's something that Spock would say that is just like you're sitting there, and when he says it, you're like, wait a minute, he just cut him down." But
and even Kirk, insisting Spock to sit down. Please sit down.
He finally does, and he explains to him that he had a calling, that he felt a presence,
and they were aware of what Spock was doing on Vulcan. So,
and McCoy becomes suspicious because McCoy is starting to wonder if he's on board with their mission, if he's not there serving his own purpose. But Kirk sees it as Spock can be a big help because he's already been mentally, at least, or spiritually in touch with this being, this powerful being.
Of course. Why would he not be? So,
and then they head into then they encounter.
And Spock helped out with warp engines at one point. Thanks to Mr. Spock's timely arrival, according to Kirk's star date,
and his calculations,
his
his mathematical calculations. Heaven only knows what that would look like on paper, but he figures it out and helps him to rebalance the engines.
By the way, 3 times that we hear Kirk's voice, the captain's log thing. If you notice this, and it was really nice of Jerry Goldsmith doing this, reusing a bit of the Star Trek theme from the original series.
Of course,
it's especially the 3 times we hear Kirk's captain's log. I love that.
I do too. It's that familiarity, that takes you back to the original series. It lets you know, these are still the same guys at work.
Yeah. And speaking of which, how did you feel the very first time you heard this, one of the new official themes to Star Trek that Jerry Goldsmith wrote and composed? That first began with the motion picture.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I was blown away by it. It was just amazing, an amazing fanfare. It really was, and still is to this day.
Yeah, no hard feelings on the original series, but I think a lot of people seem to favorite the one that Goldsmith wrote.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah,
it has a more. It just has a more regal sound to it.
There you go. Exactly.
It just suits the Star Trek universe.
There you go. And how it definitely be a huge part for the Next Generation crew. That whole thing.
Exactly.
But yeah, and when they come to the cloud and such, were you going to say something about that?
When they come to the cloud, they Spock is trying to transmit he gets, first of all, he senses something, and he says, I sense puzzlement.
Yeah.
We've been contacted. Why have we not responded? And then this, V'ger launches this energy, this plasma energy at the Enterprise. So Spock
at least it wasn't anything intense like what happened to the Klingon ships and poor space station Epsilon 9. So Spock begins to transmit a friendly message, a greeting. Transmit now.
And Kirk is getting impatient because they're seconds away from being vaporized.
I think that was cut from the director's cut, as I recall, because I would have known if it was still in the director's cut. Because a good chunk, there's a couple of scenes that from the original release that were removed for the director's cut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and we must acknowledge Robert Wise, the late legendary Robert Wise, who was the director of the motion picture.
Right, and had never seen Star Trek in his life.
But his wife knew.
Yeah.
And encouraged him to do so. And keep in mind, this is the same Robert Wise who directed 2 big musical films, West Side Story and Sound of Music. But he had already directed something science fiction, and that being The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Mm-hmm.
Which that, of course, being a science fiction classic. So
already
Robert Wise had already dipped his toes into the world of science fiction. So
he had, but I thought he did a very good job directing it.
Yes,
because the fact that he was not a Star Trek fan and he could come in, and it also gave it fresh perspective too.
The same goes for whom else would step into the world of Star Trek, like Nicholas Meyer and Stuart Baird.
Yeah, Stuart Baird.
Thank you, Stuart Baird, who directed Nemesis.
Yeah, and he was another one who had never watched Star Trek.
But it was kind of more extreme than the previous ones, than the previous directors, because like best example, he thought LaForge was an alien because of the eyes.
Yeah.
Oh my god. But who can blame him? Because like, come on, keep in mind and bear with this guy. He did not know anything about Star Trek, so who can blame him? You know.
Well, but for Robert Wise, he did. I thought he did it. He stayed faithful to the storyline.
I'm sure he wanted to. I mean, despite the fact he did not know anything much about Star Trek, I'm sure though, and if it's really the case, he wanted to, by as best he could, stay loyal to Star Trek. You know.
Right. And there were, there were several people. You know, I think there was more than one writer on that movie, but I thought that the core, the core theme of the movie, or the core plot, if you will, it was actually, I thought it was brilliant, because the whole thing with V'ger, what is a V'ger? What's V'ger mean?
Yeah.
Well,
what is this? And when they enter into it,
and they see the thing sitting there, you automatically know, if you know anything about space exploration.
This is beyond anything that the Enterprise crews ever encountered.
You're like, oh my God, that's Voyager. That's one of the Voyagers that NASA launched.
Yeah, but that's not revealed until very later on.
It isn't. But you see, there it is, and it's just because it's smudged with debris, from being in space for so long, and where it's charred and has, where it's just been through space and it's worn. The letters are covered up, part of the letters. So the only thing you can see is VGER. And the OY is completely covered up, and it completely changes, and then that's when it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just mind-blowing, because then you realize this was Voyager 6 that traveled through space and came across a civilization that was totally automated, totally mechanical.
Now,
and they bring this thing in, and they build out on.
Now, aside from the characters, when they are surprised and shocked by the sight that this is Voyager 6, was it also surprising and shocking to everybody, like even you, the audience?
There were I heard some people kind of gasp, and I gasped. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Voyager 6. And you kind of see it. You're looking at it when they first enter into this, where it's placed in the middle of this chamber. And you're looking at it and you're thinking, man, that looks familiar. I've seen it. Something that looks like that before, and you're not really sure. And even as a kid, I was like 12 years old. You're going, wow, man, that just looks familiar. And then when they get up close to it, and you know it's Voyager, and they rub that off there, you're just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah. But yeah, and more on say, because by that point they've entered into V'ger, and as we talked about already, because the long shots of V'ger, but at a certain point, something like hits on the Enterprise, and like only interested in the ship and its computers and such, collecting its data and such, and with Earth and so on, but then turning its attention to Ilia.
And Ilia is basically abducted by V'ger, and basically what she was is gone. And,
unfortunate, even for Decker.
But eventually Spock, which is interesting, Spock.
Yeah, at a certain point, and out of nowhere, Spock, he kind of, I wouldn't say like rogue or something, like
he
knows what he's doing. So
he used the Vulcan nerve pinch on a crewman, and stole a pressure suit.
But and about that, because you have gone on saying this. That crewman with the mustache and that hairstyle looks like a porn star.
He reminds me of a porn star. He does. That's hairstyle. It's ridiculous looking. I mean, it just looks ridiculous. And a big mustache, and he just, and the look on his face was like,
that's the best. Well, that's the best I can do. But,
so Spock gets the pressure suit, goes in space, and they realize that a locker, that a storage locker is empty, with
and
the pressure suit
and a spacesuit,
and one of the airlocks has been opened, and Spock has gone into space.
But even before then, the android representing Ilia had boarded the Enterprise.
Yes, and they used Decker to try to, because there were certain things that I think they started to pick up on. They felt like she may have
maybe possibly can really
retain some of the memories of Aaliyah, and they were trying to
maybe Decker
hopefully get her on their side.
and Decker can reach to her and such.
So Decker walks around the ship, and they're playing games on the recreational deck, and you know, he's telling her this was one of Aaliyah's favorite games, but she's really not into that.
Yeah.
But there's certain things that she's remembering.
And part of Aaliyah does pop out.
Part does
briefly.
pop out, but just very briefly.
Yeah.
You can tell
like a headpiece,
completely.
for example.
The headpiece she puts on, she recognizes it, but then she takes it off, and she's like, you know, take me on. You know, I don't
exactly.
I don't want to do this anymore.
And also, Aaliyah's theme is very beautiful, you know, and that being the overture for the motion picture.
Right.
Yeah, what's say on the overture for the motion picture?
The overture, which is the beginning, you're talking about?
Yeah, the black screen.
The black screen. That was
even before the Paramount logo shows.
That was.
Now, keep in mind, there's been plenty of other films that have done overtures. So.
That was a little strange to me. Just a little strange.
I don't know. I don't think it's that strange. I mean, the music's beautiful and such, and I don't know, but yeah, even like saying the director's cut, this time it was like a star field, you know. So that was nice, but yeah, and with Spock because by the way, because apparently according to the android representing Aaliyah, V'ger must join, the creator must contact her something, you know. Right.
Yeah, so you're you know. They keep talking about the creator, and you're thinking, you know,
like what does that mean specifically?
The creator, they don't, and so we do finally realize, of course, that the creator is them.
Yeah,
humans created V'ger, and they almost can't comprehend it.
No,
but it does allow when we finally see Aaliyah, and Decker wants to do it. He volunteers to join with V'ger, to join with Aaliyah,
but. Let's actually save that a little later because let's come back to Spock because he's journeying through.
Well, he gets into V'ger and he sees all these things that V'ger has collected through his journey.
Memory
through its journey through the universe, and all these things. All the Klingon ships are there intact,
and the space station Epsilon.
Right, and they're stored there.
I think I've missed the Klingon ships.
They're
there, are they? Because
they have to be there, yes.
Yeah,
but
we see Epsilon 9.
But we see Epsilon 9. That's right. They don't actually show the Klingon ships. I forgot.
Yeah, I could have. Unless we're having a Mandela effect or something, because you would think you would think that we would see the Klingon ships there. We see Epsilon 9, so surely we could see the Klingon ships.
It's a logical assumption that the Klingon ships would be there stored, just like Epsilon 9,
wherever, because
the replica of Aaliyah. But the replica of Aaliyah is much larger than what she was, when she was alive, but also that this power source that's in her neck.
And Spock, I must try to mind meld with it.
And it's beyond the power of it almost.
Oh, it must be. It's obviously painful for him because
he can't stand it because it's just. I guess it's just so much.
It's too powerful for him in the mind meld thing.
So he's knocked unconscious. Meanwhile, Kirk gets in a pressure suit, goes after him. And retrieves him. And
they allowed Kirk to go out there by himself.
Yeah. And
obviously he wanted to, so. By the way, did you realize that the spacesuits that Kirk and Spock wear, they would be reused for Wrath of Khan, for the captain of the Reliant and Chekhov?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were. So
yeah, you could tell. I mean, you could tell they're the same. Which to me that's good because that's consistency.
Maybe they just maybe there's just multiple versions of those suits that Starfleet has, presumably at that time. So
exactly.
Yeah. And Spock talking about what he witnessed and experienced. And even and as the film proceeds on, and even when V'ger's getting close to Earth. And even in the director's cut we see cool CG shots of V'ger in all of its glory,
yes.
fully. And, even Spock, there's one moment where Spock, he weeps for V'ger.
Yeah, he does. And but when he is in the sick bay, yes. he shows his more human side because he smiles.
Yes, he does. And chuckles. And
he says even that touch, he takes Jim's hand and he says, even this is beyond V'ger's comprehension. That the humanity is beyond his comprehension.
Exactly.
because it's pure logic, it's pure knowledge. That's all he's about. It's about.
And apparently, we also find out, and according from Spock, that V'ger is a child.
Yes, V'ger is a child because it's out of its infancy from when it was initially launched as a space probe, and now it's it's amassed a lot of knowledge, but even still, it would still be considered a child because it's and even at one point, McCoy, when it's something happens, I can't remember, and the ship is rocking, and McCoy says, "Your child is having a tantrum."
Yes,
Spock,
yes.
Which I thought was really funny.
Best way that McCoy could say it.
Yeah, only he could say that.
Of course, he is a doctor after all. So,
but it's interesting to see that how they portrayed this mechanism and how it had amassed
in some way,
so much knowledge.
And it's a living machine.
A living machine.
Yep.
That just doesn't make sense. Now we have AI, and we have all these robots now that almost think for themselves, which is scary enough. But at the same time, it's this whole thing with how this thing has been through the universe and has grown, not just from knowledge, but has grown physically. Is just so much bigger than what it was initially.
Yeah, and besides, V'ger needs to meet with the creator,
which is why it returned. It's like it's programmed. It knows to come back to Earth.
Yes, it does,
because it knows that's where its origins were.
Right,
and it returns to Earth, but in doing so, it doesn't realize that the actual creator is
all of them
human.
Yeah.
Right.
And even Kirk, like threatening the android or something, like trying to make an offer or deal or something,
Exactly.
That whole thing. And, well, near the end of the climax, and, well, Kirk, Bones, Spock, and even Decker tagging along with the android, them going outside of the Enterprise. And they just so happen to realize that there is air. I mean, because I don't know.
It was an envelope, atmospheric envelope had just opened up around them. Okay. So V'ger knew exactly what they needed to survive.
Exactly.
And he created that environment for them.
Right. And they do change wardrobe, like yellowish wardrobe. Like, what's on that? I don't know what that's about, but
well, it was like a what they would wear on an away mission, basically.
Okay.
Big jackets, big coats with big baggy pockets, so they could carry samples and stuff, and carry equipment.
But even they never really did that, anyways, because they still kept the uniforms on, but only in the motion picture for some reason. Just I don't know.
Yeah, they did that.
Yeah, and when they make their way in, really cool shots, and because again, seeing how big the Enterprise is compared to them when they step out of the the nacelle section.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when they come up to where the main core is, like where V'ger is and such, and when they discover, and as we've talked about, especially from you, because when Kirk discovering and rubbing off, and seeing that, Voyager 6, and according to Decker, it was launched more than 300 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The timeline of this movie.
Which, would be the appropriate time for when this movie, in the 23rd century.
Exactly. So,
right.
And when they discover some more in that well, that V'ger awaits the creator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And even Bones even saying, like, you're telling me that this, needs to physically, be with a human and such, and Decker taking it upon himself doing so.
Right.
I want this. As much as you wanted the Enterprise, I want this. But especially wanting to reunite with Ilia.
Sure. And they do.
Because at that point, because Decker, and I'm sure that goes for Ilia, how much they missed one another deep down. And thus they can finally reunite.
Yep. And that pretty much, it's at that point, really, when they get back on the Enterprise.
Yep.
They reboard the Enterprise, that V'ger becomes just pure energy.
Yes. When, even Kirk asking Spock, did we just witness the birth of a new species or life form? What he asks Spock.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because I mean, well, that Decker and Ilia are missing, but technically they're not dead. But just labeling them to Starfleet as missing. So.
And I do remember that one of the closing lines when Kirk looks at Scotty and he says, "Well, Mr. Scott, shall we give the Enterprise a proper shakedown cruise?"
Yep.
And Kirk's and Scotty says, "I would say it's time." But the best part,
Chief DeFalco taking Ilia's position, I think, because she asked Kirk, heading, sir,
and
out there,
and then he goes that away, which I thought was really cool because he got lost in himself for a minute.
Understandable, and a nice, funny way to end off the film.
Yeah,
and for that being the last line,
exactly.
And anything else you were going to say?
No, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, we went through the whole movie, and we basically took a 2.5 hour, 2 hour and 45-minute movie and condensed it into an hour. So
yeah, we did. Hey, I think it was worth it.
Yeah, it was. It was worth it.
And some of the other cast members, and as I just mentioned, she didn't have that much, but again, because popping up here and there and having some dialogue, and even when taking Ilia's place, played by Marcy Lafferty, but and some of the other cast members, some of the Klingon crewmen and another yeoman, but and here's the thing, is there anything from the director's cut that you thought was pretty good? That stuff that was removed but we got to see? I can think of, say, when Ilia is healing Chekhov, after getting electrocuted and such very badly.
That was very interesting.
And the powers that she has, the alien species that she is, and the kind of powers they have.
Right.
Yeah.
That is probably, for them to heal a human, is just simple. It's just a simple thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was.
Yeah. But anything else in the director's cut?
No, that's nothing that comes to mind, I'll say. Yeah.
But I will say this, some extra shots we see, say from Starfleet headquarters, Vulcan, and so on. Did you have a complaint on how Vulcan technically looked? Some parts of Vulcan. Okay, not the entire planet, obviously, but just a few parts of planet Vulcan.
It didn't bother me because if you recall, in the episode Amok Time.
Yes, the very first episode of season 2.
They make mention of the fact how hot it is, and he says and McCoy makes a comment, or it's either McCoy or Kirk that says something about, there's a saying about hot as Vulcan. And that's, I guess that's a very old saying. I don't know what that pertains to exactly. Maybe vulcanized rubber when it's being manufactured. I don't know. I have no idea where that comes from. But he makes a comment. He says, "Now I know where the saying hot as Vulcan comes from, because Vulcan's a very hot planet. The air is a little different.
Yeah.
So
at least they're able to breathe on Vulcan.
They can, but they get much tired. They get tired much quicker. And that kind of thing. So anyway, there's that.
Yeah. So
I didn't see anything wrong with it. I think it's just a part of Vulcan that you see. It's just a different part of Vulcan.
Part of Vulcan, and where Spock is.
Exactly.
Yeah, on Vulcan. But but I think that's about it, right?
That's about it.
Yeah. So just overall, Star Trek the Motion Picture. It is what it is, and it may not be one of the best Star Trek films, and despite that this is the first ever Star Trek film, but hey, again, it's not a god-awful Star Trek film. And you know what? Another way to put it best, Star Trek the Motion Picture, this being the first Star Trek film, a rocky start, wouldn't you say?
Kind of.
A rocky/rough start.
Yeah, they had to find their way.
And especially, I can't believe we didn't mention this, a lot of people, I think even still to this day, people feeling that Star Trek the Motion Picture was going in the same direction as, say, Stanley Kubrick's 2001. Almost.
It's funny you say that.
I feel just almost, not fully, but still.
Yeah, it did definitely have that feel to it. It really did, because it was a much more cerebral film than. I mean,
surely you would have known this, right? Comparisons to this in 2001.
Yes,
if you've heard of this,
right?
Yeah. But anything else you were saying?
No, I think if. I will give you my rating.
Well, but again, just let me finish what I was saying, because it may not be the best Star Trek film. It may not be, again, it's not bad, but without it, look, we wouldn't have where Star Trek would go next, even with its next movie. Yeah, I don't think it's that bad. I enjoy it. I mean, sure, May not be the best, but still, you get the point. Then your final thoughts and results, and before we rate it.
Again, it was a good entry, back into the Star Trek universe.
Yes, it was.
It has its own place. Like I said, it stands on its own.
Yes.
It's a solid movie. And I use a 1 to 5 star rating.
You do. Yeah. Okay. Now we come to how we rate it. We'll start with you.
I give it 4 stars.
4 stars.
I give it 4 stars.
Oh boy.
The only Star Trek movie that would really get 5 stars for me. There are 2 that would get 5 stars. Well, 3 actually. Wrath of Khan, Undiscovered Country, and The Voyage Home. Those all get 5 stars. Those are near perfect Star Trek movies to me.
What about First Contact? That too.
Well, yeah, First Contact is good, but First Contact is that's Next Generation.
Well,
I'm talking about the original.
It's still Star Trek, and technically, if you knew this,
well,
for the Star Trek the Star Trek movies with the Next Generation crew, they're technically in line with the first ones. Like technically, Star Trek Generations is Star Trek movie number 7, and from there on, Star Trek First Contact number 8.
Right,
you get the point.
I get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, First Contact is a 5 star. The rest of them are 4 stars, and I even give. You might not believe this, but I even give Star Trek 5 4 stars.
Because you
it's still fresh in my mind because I watched it last night.
And you don't think it's that bad, like compared to how other people feel about it?
No, I don't. I really don't.
Me neither.
I think it was a good movie. I think it had a solid plot line.
And especially with the antagonist too. I don't really think Sybok was that much of an evil Vulcan, because he had a reason with what he was doing. He did. And he was going to do whatever it takes, even have that meaning, like he had to forcibly, lure the Enterprise and such, still. But
your rating?
Yes, my rating, because it was on my mind because I'm giving Star Trek the motion picture 6 out of 10 stars. I don't see 6 out of 10 stars. I've explained this before. I don't see 6 out of 10 stars, in my opinion, that bad. So again, 6 out of 10 stars for Star Trek the motion picture. I mean, wouldn't you say that sounds pretty good?
That sounds good, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, for me, I see 6 out of 10. The way I do it, I see it as still being pretty good. So yeah. So again, 6 out of 10 for me, and for you?
It's 4 out of 5 stars.
4 out of 5 stars for you. Yeah, so there you go. 6 out of 10 for me, and 4 out of 5 stars for my dad. And what about you guys? What do you think of Star Trek the motion picture itself? If by any chance any of you, like my dad, having grown up and seen this movie and such, or even say for those of you that are my age, and if any of you, like me, are Trekkie fans, when was the first time you watched Star Trek? Did you have a DVD copy, Blu-ray, or video? Did you see this on TV, Paramount Plus? Which version did you see first, the theatrical or the director's cut? What were some of your favorite moments from the motion picture? And how do you feel on, because some parts of the film where it just drags on, but still, some certain moments that happen here and there, the reveal of V'ger, which really being Voyager 6, etc., and with the characters in this. And by the way, very quickly, I meant to bring this up. Remember that story that when J.J. Abrams, he first saw the motion picture?
Yeah, he was with his dad, who was a motion picture executive, and he was really taken by the. I remember him saying that he was really taken by the flyby shots of the new Enterprise. He was not a Star Trek fan, but he was. He wasn't
at that time.
No, he wasn't. But you see some of that in how he filmed the reboot. Yeah. And when they first see the Enterprise, the new Enterprise in the refit.
And you see, when it came to very quickly to say this, when it came to the reboot and with the Kelvin timeline,
yes,
J.J. Abrams was then more and really respect and love Star Trek and the characters when he got himself attached into this.
Exactly.
More.
Exactly.
Yeah. And not to say that even before he got himself attached to Star Trek, that's not to say he didn't dislike Star Trek. He respected and such, but he wasn't really a fan nor really into it. Not to say like how he was, being a huge fan of Star Wars.
Exactly.
But again, when it came to the first Star Trek film, the Kelvin timeline, that's when he really grew more appreciation and respect and love for the franchise and its characters. Yeah. But yeah, so wanted to mention that because, yeah, a nice mentioning of that and with J.J. Abrams, and if any of you have heard that story. But yeah, just overall, what do you think of the motion picture itself, and where would this be at in your top favorite Star Trek films? I mean, any of you that really do appreciate this, and hey, like I said, without the motion picture, well, we wouldn't have what would come next, even when it really came to Wrath of Khan. So there you go, it's obvious. So yeah, again, what do you think of Star Trek, the motion picture itself, and with what me and my dad have had to say about it, our review, and yeah, what did you think of our review? Leave comments and give this review video a like, as always. And with all that being said, we thank you very much for watching our review of Star Trek the Motion Picture. More review videos are on the way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward. And we will see you guys in the next video / review. And any last words?
I must be off.
He says that. For me, again, thank you for watching. Take care. Peace out. And live long and prosper.